If you want to improve your handstand at home with a quick 10-minute session, then this video is for you. These drills and movements are ones that I use with my clients, my members, and members of my free community as well, to improve their understanding of how their body moves, their mobility, and most importantly, their handstands. No equipment needed, so let's get started and I'll talk you through the session and all the things that you need to look out for throughout it. For warm-ups, I like to include things that are practical and that you're going to need and use throughout the rest of the session. So the first thing to do is to warm up your wrists and think about weight placement for your handstand. Lots of people will go through this kind of drill like really passively and I just need to warm up my wrists ready for my handstands. What we want to be thinking here is, can I feel the difference between when my weight is forwards and I can feel my knuckles pressing into the floor, and what is the difference when I then rock backwards and the weight shifts into more the heel of my hand. This is a really practical application of this for your handstands, because we want to have our shoulders over our knuckles in our handstands, and we need to be able to feel ourselves actively pressing into the floor with our hands and our knuckles pressing into the floor as well. You'll do 30 seconds to a minute of tabletop rocks or making circles, but what we want to do is, whilst yes, we want to feel a stretch through our forearms, make sure our wrists are primed and ready, we also want to be getting our brain and body ready by thinking, where can I feel that weight shift and change in my hands? Now, the next movement in our warm-up or primer is a cat cow. This is so great for body awareness when it comes to a handstand practice. This is the position that is important to us when we're working on our handstands. It's a very exaggerated position, but it helps us to understand what it actually feels like to pull our ribs in, pull our belly button in, and tuck our tailbone in. So you can see here that they're all pulling in towards each other. And yes, we don't want this amount of rounded back in our handstand, but oftentimes when we're upside down, it can feel really hard to know exactly where we are and what our body is doing. So if we can exaggerate this position the correct way up, then it's going to be easier to find this sensation over time as we go into our handstands. What cat-cow for us also does is it reinforces and reminds us that this is the position that we don't want to be feeling in our handstands. So we start to build up an awareness of what it feels like to hold and find correct positions and positions that are not desirable for us to be able to hold a straight handstand. We want to make sure that our legs are ready as well, in particular hips and hamstrings. Big limiting factor when it comes to working on a lot of handstand drills off the box or on the wall can oftentimes be our hamstrings. So I really like using the low lunge to half splits to help us get ready for handstands. Moving between the two positions, feeling the stretch down the back of your hamstrings, and then into your low lunge and pushing your hips down towards the floor so you get a stretch through this hip flexor here as well. Now, it's not just necessarily about stretching here. What we want to also be thinking about is where exactly we're feeling the stretch and what body position we are in. So notice again how when I go through these stretches here, I am actually in my hollow body position. So rather than just passively and not really intentionally going through these stretches and just moving backwards and forwards and thinking, oh, I'm really tight, what we want to be thinking about is what positions is the rest of my body in and where can I feel it? Because where can I feel it gives me a good indicator of what I need to work on and what might be a little bit trickier in the session that you've got coming up. And then this extra layer of bodily awareness really helps. So the more we can do in the warm-up or on easier movements, then the better our more complicated skills are going to be. Moving on to some technique work next. When I'm structuring skill focused sessions, I like to do the technique work first, and then you can add in the strength work at the end so that you're not too fatigued and we can focus on the correct shapes and positions during your technique work, because sometimes if we're fatigued, then that can be harder to hold the position that we want. But both are just as important as each other. We want to be working technique and strength. What we want to focus on and build on here is what we worked on in the warm-up. We can either do this off the box, we can do toes to wall. The great thing about handstand work is that it's so scalable. The lower your feet are, the easier this is going to be. So we can do our wall facing handstand, or you can even do this in the pike position with your toes on the floor. Work towards 30-second holds here, but I would rather see correct positioning over length of time held, especially to begin with. Building on those focus points we had in the warm-up, we want to see weight pressing down into your knuckles. If I was to see this from the side, I would want to see your shoulders stacked over your knuckles as well. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then also we have our hips stacked over our shoulders. So we've got hips stacked over, shoulders stacked over knuckles. And now we can refer back to the tabletop rocks that we did at the beginning of the session where we're pressing that weight down into our knuckles. Can I feel the same sensation as I did in the warm-up? The second thing that we were working in the warm-up as well was the feeling of ribs in, belly button in, and tailbone in. We want to make sure that we are pulled in and away from the wall. So we don't want to see your hips leaning towards the wall here. We want to see ribs in, belly button pulled in, tailbone tucked in. So we've got this nice flat straight hollow body position in our handstand hold. The one thing that we didn't touch on in the warm-up was our shoulders, and this is what is going to help us be able to hold the hollow position. We need to have our weight in the right place in our hands, so we're going to find that feeling that we did in the warm-up with our tabletop rocks, weight in your knuckles, and then you're going to focus on pushing the floor away as much as you possibly can so that you can get your shoulders and your biceps to cover your ears. And for anyone who's wondering, this is what it's going to look like in our pike position. So in the warm-up I mentioned how our hamstrings can sometimes be a limiting factor with how some of these drills feel, or how you're able to perform them. Bend your knees here, because the main thing we want to focus on is the upper body when we're working on these kind of drills here. Shoulders over knuckles, hips over shoulders, pushing tall through your shoulders, pushing the floor away with your weight in your knuckles, and then ribs, belly button and tailbone in. I would work on being able to perform 3 rounds of up to 30 seconds. The thing we need to remember is that if we're finding and holding this correct position, even in the most basic scaling option with our feet on the box or toes on the floor, you're probably going to find yourself shaking. It's really hard to hold this correct position for any length of time. So what you want to do if you're planning on working on your handstands over a period of weeks is start off with something you can do in week 1, and then as the weeks go on, you're going to increase your hold times, but focus on making sure you always have the correct shape that you're holding. We're going to move on to the strength work to go with this. We're going to reinforce the hollow position, so that ribs in, tailbone in, belly button in position, and do some hollow holds. Again, working up to being able to do this for 30 seconds or more. We want to make sure that shoulders are up off the floor, ribs are pulled in. So imagine you've got a piece of string that's pulling your ribs in and down towards your belly button, so you're rounding your back. Belly button is pulling in towards the floor and your tailbone is tucked in. What we can see here is there's absolutely no daylight or gap underneath my lower back. You want to imagine that if someone was to come and put their hand underneath your lower back, that they can't. It's just gonna get stuck and they can't do it. If we see any daylight, or if anyone can get your hand underneath your lower back when you're doing these hollow holds, it means that you're not engaging your abs enough, and that you need to make sure belly button is pushed down and ribs need to lift up and down towards your belly button more. To make this position easier, you can bend your knees in, because that helps us round our back more, and you can also bring your arms down by your sides, because it makes it easier for you to lift your shoulders and curl your ribs in. Correct positioning over how difficult you're making this for yourself, and over time as well. And then the last piece of this handstand workout is a pike handstand push-up. I'll just show you our pike handstand position here. Before we talk about the pike handstand push-up, this is what our pike handstand on the floor might look like. What we want to bear in mind though is that in this position it's much more difficult, obviously, because your feet are lower, to get that vertical stacked position. So what we want to focus on here is still making sure that our hips, shoulders and wrists and knuckles are all in line here, and we've got that hollow body position. The reason why this is easier is because we're not as vertical. The more vertical you get with handstands, the harder the drill is going to be. Pike handstand push-ups, really great for working on shoulder positioning and shoulder strength as well. It also builds up that awareness and sensation of tipping forwards, so we've got that transference of weight into our knuckles and our hands are pushing into the floor. Notice how I tip forwards as I begin the rep, and then I push back, so I've got completely open shoulders at the top in my pike handstand position. Now the main thing is we don't want to lean forward so far that it turns into a plank and a push-up. What we want to do is shift forwards just enough so that our weight goes into our knuckles, but our bum is still up in the air. Notice how I still have this hollow position, ribs and tailbone in and belly button in as I lower down towards the floor. The top of my head taps the floor, and then I push back up again, maintaining that position and fully pushing through my shoulders at the top so they cover my ears. What I'll do is I'll link the video demonstration below of the seated overhead press that you can do if you are struggling with the pike handstand push-ups. And to make the pike handstand push-ups more difficult, we can elevate our feet. With these, you want to aim for between 5 to 10 reps. Once you can get to 10 reps, that's a good indicator that you're ready to move on, so you can reduce the reps and make the movement harder. Again, aim for 3 rounds of this, and you want to be repeating all of these things. So repetition is key when it comes to learning technique and also building strength. But what we want to do with the strength portion is increase the amount of reps that we're doing, or if you're doing it weighted, then we want to increase the weight that you're doing. Not necessarily every single week, but we need to see progression each week, adding on 1 rep until you can get to 10 reps and then drop the reps down and increase the weight from there. That's the entire session. Obviously, you can adapt the times and the numbers and also the rounds to make it fit in with your schedule, but it should take about 10 minutes. And if you do this consistently and repeat it and progress, then your handstand will feel entirely different, even in just a couple of weeks' time. This is a great example of how we train inside my communities and my one-to-one coaching. I've got loads of free handstand resources inside my free open club community, which I'll put the link for in the description. And if you want specific coaching on your handstand or any other gymnastics, strength or weightlifting work, then you can join my strength and skill community, which I'll also pop the link for below, where you can access programs but also coaching support to make sure you're practicing these drills and progressions correctly.